Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fernelli. That's Danny Cannell. That's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live at youtube.com/cover3 and all across the 24/7 Sports Facebook network. Thanks for watching live. Thanks for hanging out. If you smash that subscribe, smash that like, come and join us in the chat. We love having your feedback all throughout the show, especially as we're running down these win totals, counting them up for you. We did the SEC East on Monday. Today, we tackled the SEC West, Alabama, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Arkansas, LSU, Mississippi State, and Auburn. We are getting all of our lines, of course, from Caesars Sportsbook. We do have some news that we want to hit before we get out of here. So some thoughts on the injury news at Wake Forest, the injury news at Florida, both very significant. We'll be sure to hit that before we get out of here. But we got a very, very busy loaded slate. 7 teams, all with win totals of 6 or above. So, I mean, gentlemen, y'all ready to count them up?
It just means more.
And now, the general manager of Vanderbilt football.
As much as I think it's the under is a safe play, like I can't even.
Count them up. Count them up. How many games y'all gonna win this fall?
I can't fathom 8 wins.
How many games y'all gonna win this fall?
I just can't. I don't see it. It's not on there. It's not the schedule I'm looking at. Unless there's another schedule somewhere.
RTR, Roll Tide in the building. The chat is here to listen in on our thoughts about the Alabama Crimson Tide, who have an over-under win total of 11 wins at the Caesars Sportsbook. It is priced at -140 to the over, +110 to the under. The non-conference slate, Utah State comes to Tuscaloosa. Then we go to Austin for a highly anticipated meeting between Nick Saban and Steve Sarkisian. So Alabama at Texas, very, very fun. One of the big games of September. ULM also going to be coming to Tuscaloosa, and Austin Peay right there in November before the Iron Bowl. The draw from the East, the Tyler Steen revenge game, as we referenced on Monday. Vanderbilt will be coming to Alabama. The Alabama-Tennessee game in October, that one will be in Knoxville. Road draw for the Crimson Tide at Arkansas, at LSU, at Ole Miss. The home games, Texas A&M, October 8th, Mississippi State, and again, the Iron Bowl against Auburn at Bryant-Denny Stadium. We've got our reigning Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young. We do have some turnover on offense elsewhere. Defensively, we return maybe the best defender, maybe the number 1 NFL draft pick in Will Anderson. And the popular conversation around this Alabama team has been about so many young players, so many highly recruited players. We talked about the blue chip ratio, how absurd it is that basically every single Alabama signee who's not a kicker, a punter, or a long snapper is basically a blue chip. And that's what gives Alabama this stupid roster of talent. 11 wins is a tall ask, especially with the grind of the SEC West and a road trip to Texas. What are we doing with 11 wins for Alabama?
Over. I think this is basically betting on if Bryce Young stays healthy or not. Okay. I have a lot of teams in the SEC West that I like as top 15 type teams. I'm not totally convinced that any of those teams in the SEC West is a legitimate, like, top 6 or 7 power rating type team. Bryce Young is the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. Alabama went out and raided the portal for, a more dependable receiver and an explosive receiver. They went out and got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's an excellent running back and pass catcher. They shored up the offensive line a little bit. And, people talk about some of the guys last year on that offensive line who, didn't perform super well. And that's true. But we talked about this last year in like late September, October, when people are like, oh, look, we said, hey, if guys go down, J.C. Latham is a freshman, a really talented freshman who played defensive end for part of his high school career. George was definitely not ready. I talked about seeing those guys in camps. Now both those kids are a year younger, so I actually like their offensive line depth a little bit better. I also believe that the switch they made at offensive line coach might have been the most important move Alabama made all season. I don't believe that they were happy with the performance of the offensive line coaching last season, and I think they will be much better up front. Defensively, Kirby Smart said it in his Game of the Year coaching tape this year. I have to think pass first now as a defensive coach on every down. and we'll play the run on the way to the quarterback. I think Bama could do that. They'll limit explosive plays. If Bryce Young stays healthy, I think they're 12-0.
Tyler Harrell, also from the speedy wide receiver from Louisville. Jermaine Burton, as you mentioned, at wide receiver. Jahmyr Gibbs should be huge. I'm excited about Dallas Turner, guy who flashed a little bit, who could be another huge part of this defense. Everyone's going to be so focused on Will Anderson. It's another year of experience for Kool-Aid McKinstry and some players on the back end of that defense. 12-0. They show up to Atlanta without a loss on the resume. And I'm also on the over.
Danny, go under. Do it.
As soon as Bud said that about Bryce Young staying healthy, that was my thing. Like, if he gets an ankle and he misses a
Ty
game,
Simpson's ready, buddy. Boy, I'll tell you what.
There is, and this goes back to when Nick Saban got so much attention when Nick Saban said last year was a rebuilding year. But I think when he means that, he's like, we almost lost to Auburn. Like, that's not happening again this year. I think that's kind of what he was alluding to. And last year, they were decimated by injuries too in the national championship game. They had 2 1,000-yard receivers out, and they were still in the game. So I think it's also like, what if Will Anderson gets hurt? It's just, you'd have to see some really outside of football things have to happen to see this not go as planned. I think the year to bet on Bama is after they've been disappointed. And I think this is an angry, motivated team, which is when you need to go all in on Bama. So I'm on the over too.
I think this is the best team in the country. I think this team is going to win the national title. And I think this team is going to go over the win total. I look at the schedule. At Texas, okay, that's early. Tough road game on the road. They'll probably win that by 2 scores minimum.
Right?
Arkansas on the road, tough test. Probably going to win that by 2 scores minimum. Tennessee on the road, tough test. Probably going to win that by 2 scores minimum. LSU by 2 scores. Ole Miss by 2 scores. And then the home slate, I won't be shocked if Alabama slips up at some point during the regular season, just because this is still college football we're talking about, and that does still happen. And they do play a lot of tough games. They're in a very tough division. So there's a chance that they're going to screw up and lose a game, but they're not going to lose twice. So I feel like if you take the over, at worst, you're going to push here. This team's going to go 12-0 or 11-1. It is going to win the West. It is going to win the SEC. It is going to win the playoff. And then we'll talk about, is Nick Saban retiring? And he won't. He'll be back. He'll come back next year, and then they'll do it again.
What I was just about to ask this. Kyle from the chat does it as well. So if we are, since we've got 4 overs on the board, if we are to select a game, what is the most likely slip-up spot for the Crimson Tide?
LSU, by far.
By far? Explain.
Yeah, I think so. Because if you look at the teams that beat Nick Saban's defense, they typically have one thing in common. It's elite receivers that mess up what Saban wants to do, which is play one-on-one on the outside and win the numbers game elsewhere. And I think LSU might have the best receiving core in the SEC. So, Kayshawn and those guys, if they have a great day, and Mawson, let's go back. Let's remember Alshon Jeffrey. Let's remember how Ole Miss did it. Back when Ole Miss had really stud receivers. I could see that potentially. And they also have 4 guys on the defensive line who I think will be decent NFL picks at the very least. So it's in Baton Rouge. I think that's the toughest game on their schedule.
Could you not make that same argument then for Texas?
No, I don't think Texas can get stops. I'm not in on Texas' defense this year. But you could make the offensive argument for sure.
I would go Texas A&M is most likely, but
what about Tennessee? Wouldn't you put Tennessee the same as Texas?
No, Tennessee ain't stopping them.
But I don't think Tennessee is the same level of receivers that LSU does. And if I'm Nick, Tennessee wants to play that Baylor spread stuff. I'm going to just stay in 2 deep. You can try to run it on me some. I'll beat you in the red zone. I'm going to let Turner and Anderson rush. I'm worried about the LSU game, and I'm worried about the Ole Miss game because of the quality of athletes, because of the stuff Lane can do, I think, to frustrate Nick, and because they're also back-to-backs.
Texas would be hilarious.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because again, I'll shout out Reddit CFB for this one, but they first put this worm in my head, and it's been rattling around, but it would be Texas beating Alabama, then losing to UTSA. The most incredible 2-week turn that we could have all season.
2 touchdown favorites every game, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say 2 score. I don't know if 2 touchdown, but there'll be 2 score.
Well, let's see what Vegas has.
That's what I
Vegas
talked to a Vegas insider last week on the radio show, and he said 2 touchdowns every game. I was just seeing if that was what you had too, bud.
What's the date of the A&M game?
October 8th.
October 8th.
That's at home. They'll definitely be 2 touchdowns.
From the Westgate. They have Bama 17
Yeah.
hosting.
I'll take A&M.
Oh, just on principle.
Yeah,
there.
with the points,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. That probably got knocked down. I can look in the app, but it's probably still 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think that we are looking at a 2 touchdown probably, and likely and definitely 2 score favorite in every single game. They might get pushed, but this team, and look, then we get to do the real fun with Alabama, which is nitpick them against the best teams in the country. But that doesn't happen until December. They'll show up to Atlanta as SEC West champs, 12-0. Count them up. Turning our attention to those Texas A&M Aggies, over under win total at the Caesar Sportsbook of 8.5 wins, -170 to the over, +145 to the under. 4 home non-conference games: Sam Houston State, App State, Miami, and UMass all come into College Station. From the East, they go to South Carolina. They play Florida at home. In the West, they go to Mississippi State, to Alabama, to Auburn. And the Arkansas game in Arlington counts as a home game this year. So you only have 2 division home games at Kyle Field. Those will be against Ole Miss and LSU. LSU is the regular season finale. The big question here, do we feel confident that Texas A&M in its quarterback room has a quarterback who can help the Aggies compete with everybody else in the SEC, and maybe even like Alabama thrown out? Like, is this a team that is otherwise defense should be absolutely nasty? The offensive line, even after some losses, should still be very good. We've gotten things taken care of in terms of our legal troubles at the skill position players, as those charges were dropped, and they should still be looking at a team that has every answer except at the quarterback position. If you've got a hunch, or if you've got insider info, or what your assumption is on who ends up winning that job, or if it matters at all, that's probably where my questions start. But Texas A&M 8.5, what are we doing?
I'm going over, and I feel pretty good about it. I have concerns about this team. They're well documented because we've talked about them a lot on this show over the last few years, like the explosiveness of the offense and the passing game. It hasn't been there at all under Jimbo in recent years. But most of those concerns are bigger concerns to me when the Aggies are playing elite teams than they are when they're playing just the meat of their schedule. And when you look at the schedule, like you said, Chip, the Arkansas game counts as a home game. But the only road tests, if you look at the Aggies' overall road schedule, outside of the road trip to Alabama, at Mississippi State, at South Carolina, at Auburn. Not easy, but they're not exactly the most terrifying road games that you could possibly have while playing in the SEC. So I think they catch a break there. In the non-con, yes, App State is a tough game, and I would not schedule that if I was a premier program, because that's just, ask Michigan what happens. But I still think A&M is probably going to win that game pretty easily. I just think they're going to be too big, too fast, too strong. I think Miami is going to be better this year, but I think at home at Kyle Field, that is going to be a win for the Aggies. And I just go up and down the schedule. It's like, okay, they're losing the Alabama game. And even then, they might not. But what are the other games on here where you look at and say, oh, that's a real problem for them? I just don't see enough. So I think this team is going to go 9-3. I think 10-2 is just as likely as 8-4. So I'm going over.
Yeah, the margins are small. The margins are small. The point spreads are not going to be anything that we got close to Alabama, but there's no doubt this is the second best team in the West. And so I'm with you. I'm on the over here.
I'm on the under. And I'm saying this is a guy that, I told you guys 5 months ago, I bet them for the national title. But I want big tickets on this team because I need big things to click. Okay. They have had the second worst explosive pass offense in the entire SEC since Jimbo Fisher got there. Only Vanderbilt saves them. Their receiver development is terrible. They do not create wide open plays. It's all about, can you hit this guy in stride with a small margin? They want to have answers for every play. They don't play a lot of college offense. And I say all that, and yet they still have a ton of talent. They're the second most talented team in the West, I think. But that talent is also very young in some spots, particularly on the defensive line where they lost their top 4 guys by snap count. I want a national title ticket on this team because I feel like those kind of true freshman pups they have could grow up into some dogs by the time they sneak into the playoff as a one-loss non-SEC champion. But I only have, I think, 4 games where they are clearly double-digit favorites. Jimbo's teams also play very slow, which means that actually minimizes their talent advantage because it lets teams hang around. It also lets them pull some upsets at times because the better teams can't pull away. So at plus 145, I want the under here. I'll bet the under and I'll hold my national title ticket.
I like the play because I was tempted too. I don't love the value at minus 170 on the over. I wrote down, I had 7 wins automatic. I'm curious, I think they beat Arkansas. I think they get, last year's game, they come out ready. I think they beat Miami at home. Mm-hmm. I did not have Miami as a locked in W though. That's not including one of the 7. So then can they win, games on the road at Mississippi State? I think could present some problems. If they have to score, like Bud's talking about, they're not going to be a toe to go toe to toe with Mississippi State if they get.
Are they favored at Mississippi State?
What's that?
Are they favored at Mississippi State? What's the date on that?
I would
October
assume
1st.
They would be October 1st. It's
I think
Mississippi trap State game if there ever has one.
Mississippi State's a very short favorite if it's favored.
I almost want to just copy what Bud said. I'm on the over because when I look at these teams, like Auburn, I think is I had Auburn as a top. I think they beat Florida at home. I think they beat LSU at home. These are some of my lock wins. I have them winning on the road at South Carolina. The couple toss-ups, Ole Miss at home, I think they beat. And I think they beat Auburn on the road because who knows where Auburn's going to be November 12th. And we'll get to them in a little bit. But I've got them going over. But I kind of like the way Bud played it because if they go, if they do get things right, they could be that team that everybody's looking for outside of the top 3. So I like that little, I don't know what you would call that. Is there a name for that
straddle,
hedge
maybe?
You're doing?
The straddle? They are favored by 6.5 in Starkville right now at the Westgate.
Mississippi State is favored by 6.5.
No, A&M is.
That's what I'm surprised.
Well, I don't agree with that by my numbers.
Me too.
Give me the cowbell. I'll take them in 6.5 right now.
Wow.
Do you play fast enough to win by double digits? I don't know.
These win totals don't require a margin of victory.
Right.
No, they don't.
Just require victories. And
last year, A&M in their SEC games, their double-digit wins were Mizzou 35-14, South Carolina 44-14, Auburn 20-3, and that's it.
For the chat, no, I played A&M at 40-1, not 15-1. I do not want 15-1 on the Natty. That's no.
What? All right. So what about the quarterback position?
I think it'll be Haynes King.
Haynes King?
Yeah. Fairly confident.
Nice. I mean, I guess that's a good thing because I looked at all 3 of those options as pretty good players. So if you've got one who's taking control of it, I think that means that Haynes King is set to live up to everything that was projected of him.
Right,
he's got some special legs too, right? I mean, he's a good athlete. He adds an element that, with A-Chain in the backfield. Has they announced anything with Anaya Smith?
Yeah, the charges got dropped.
Charges dropped.
Oh, so no issues.
Yeah, suspension over. He's back.
I need one of our listeners to make a meme for me. Like the Mario meme where he's holding the crown and it's like, you drop this, King. I need you to do that, but replace the crown with a football. So that way I could tweet that when Haynes King fumbles. Like, you drop this, King.
Oh my gosh.
Got it. Also, Tom did a real solid by doing the no context. I think that Texas A&M loses to South Carolina. Tagged Texas.
You're welcome.
And didn't include the wouldn't it be fun? That's wouldn't it be funny if. So I guess I have to defend myself here because I can get you to 9-3 while maintaining a loss at South Carolina. It's 4-0 in the non-con. You beat Florida at home. That gets us to 5. Arkansas is a win. Ole Miss is a win. LSU's a win. Now all of a sudden we're to 8. And I just need you to win either at Mississippi State, where we just mentioned they're 6.5-point favorites, or at Auburn, where again on November 12th, I heavily lean the Aggies that way. So even if my wouldn't it be funny if, and thank you, Bud, You tried to fend off some of them, but I just you got to just be steamrolled. You know that the people that are hollering at me on the internet don't listen to the show, right? That you don't get the show type joke there. But
Not yet, they don't.
There we go. But yeah, I think I can still get you to 9-3, still get you to the over, even if wouldn't it be funny? And Texas A&M was the original benefactor of wouldn't it be funny? Because it was Florida turning right around when they were on top of the world, and then Kellen Mond taking him down the very next week. So we could still get there, even with what would be the biggest win of Shane Beamer's young career. How many games are going to win this fall? Ole Miss over under win total of 7.5. This is another one with heavily priced. We had -140 to the over for Alabama, -170 for Texas A&M, 7.5 for the Rebs, and it is -150 to the over, +120 to the under. Non-con, Troy, Central Arkansas, at Georgia Tech, and Tulsa. The draw from the East, Kentucky at home, Vanderbilt on the road. Then when we get into division play, the Ole Miss will be at LSU, at Texas A&M, at Arkansas, with Auburn, Alabama, and Mississippi State coming to town. Another team that leaned heavily on the transfer portal, Jackson Dart, coming in as he and Luke Altmaier are the quarterback room without Matt Corral. We also got to see Zach Evans, the former TCU running back. He has landed at Ole Miss. Defensively, we lost Sam Williams, lost some very important defenders. We also lost DJ Durkin was there last year, right? He was at Texas A&M now. Yep. Yeah. Also lost DJ Durkin as defensive coordinator. So after what was truly a historic season for Ole Miss football, Lane Kiffin leading the Rebs all the way into the New Year's Six, what are we expecting with the encore, and what are we doing with over under 7.5?
I went first, last one. Somebody else go.
Under.
I'll go. Go. Yeah. Explain.
I think defensive losses are going to be significant. I think that to imagine that everything is going to click offensively, it requires us to be, very confident that you're going to be able to just plug and play. We also lost Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator who's been there, who is now at Oklahoma. I think there is still, as Bud mentioned, a high level of athleticism. There is still enough for Ole Miss to go and be dangerous, especially with the way that Lane Kiffin can, draw things up, call plays, try to scheme against some of these better defenses. But I just don't think that this is a team compared to the rest of those teams in the middle of that division, compared to an Arkansas, compared to an LSU, maybe LSU, Mississippi State more than LSU. But as we look at this part of the SEC West, I don't think that they are definitively better. And when I have all these question marks and I think that there might be a chance of a regression, especially after a huge season, I end up leaning on the other side of some of these toss-up games. I mean, Ole Miss could be 1-3 on the road in SEC play. They could go to LSU and lose, go to Texas A&M and lose. They could go to Arkansas and lose. You start to see these losses add up. Alabama, I'm going to give that to Alabama. Kentucky, that's not a guaranteed win, even with that being at home. So I'm going under here.
See, I'm with you. I expect there to be regression off a 10-2 season. It's just, I think that regression is still going to finish with them going over their win total of 7.5. I think that this could be like an 8-4 team. I think they could start 7-0. I don't think that is all that unrealistic, because if you look at their first 7 games, they've got 2 on the road, Georgia Tech and Vandy. The home games are Troy, Central Arkansas, Tulsa. Those are 3 wins. They're going to beat Georgia Tech. They're starting 4-0.
Right.
Then you get Kentucky at home on homecoming. I agree. That's not a gimme, but I think that that's a game that at home the Rebels can win. I think they're going to probably beat Vandy on the road. And I think Auburn at home, they can win. Mm-hmm. So now we're looking at a team that's going to be like 7-0, 6-1, who needs to get to 1 or 2 wins in that stretch. And you're right. That is when things really start to kind of pick up as far as the level of difficulty, because you get LSU and A&M back-to-back on the road before your bye. There's a very good chance you're losing both of those games. You're coming off the bye against Alabama. Very good chance you're losing that game. Arkansas on the road, going to be a tough test, but it's winnable. And then, of course, the Egg Bowl is the Egg Bowl. I think this team is going to be worse than last year record-wise. I don't know if it's going to actually be a worse team, but I think 8-4 is more likely than 7-5. So I'm on the over.
I'm on the over as well. Now, this is not a bet for me. It's just like a slight over edge. I don't love the 140. There you go, Jagnol.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely don't want the under at this price. It's like a small edge. I looked at this. I'm like, damn, I don't like what my simulator is spitting out, and I kind of dug into the guts of why it is. And part of it is because I just have them as really overwhelming favorites in their first 4 games. So I think they really have almost a guaranteed 4-0. I actually have the likelihood of them starting 6-0 as extremely high. And to me, the order of these games is important because of how many transfers Ole Miss took, right? If they had to play a tougher early schedule, it would bother me because I worry a little bit about some of the chemistry of this team, given that they are going to start, 8 or 9 transfers potentially. But they've got some real potential impact guys. I think Jared Ivey coming in on the defensive line should help them a lot. Their secondary, they took a lot of dudes. They got Isheem Young from Iowa State. Ladarius Tennyson's a pretty good athlete from Auburn. I'm not really sure how much he's going to play. Obviously, I trust Lane Kiffin to score points. I think they have a nice option there in Luke Altmaier at quarterback. I'm not even sure it's going to be Jackson Dart. I think Altmaier's potentially going to beat him out. And then the thing that really put this over the top for me was I was talking to Cole Kubelik on the SC Network at SC Media Day, and he was just singing the praises of that Ole Miss offensive line and what they have returning. And he's on the voting committee for the Joe Moore Award. He really knows offensive lines well. And I was like, all right, sometimes it's tough to tell because they run so much funky stuff, but he really likes him. They add Mason Brooks, the transfer from Western Kentucky, who was a very good player for the Hilltoppers last year. I'm going to take the over here. I think that early, September, early October schedule really helps.
Have you found an SEC network analyst who'll say something bad about the SEC?
Whoa! Not on TV.
Cole. He's good. He's one of the best in business.
Yeah.
I'm just messing with him. I'm on the under. I'm going with more of the historical trend of where this program has been. I think it's headed in the right direction. I agree with you guys. So and I think this division more so than most, a lot of them you go through and you mark up your wins and your losses, and then you have toss-up games. This one, more than any, I have the least amount of automatic wins and automatic losses in this division, period, outside of Alabama. You're like, man, and then there's a lot of toss-up games. I think Bud made some really good points about the keeping things together, getting those transfers up to speed. I don't know, Matt Corral was really good last year. I think he was a really good quarterback that I think there could be a little bit of a setback in a very quarterback-driven system. If you can run the ball, that helps. I just think they're going 7-5. And I like the value at plus 120. I don't love minus 150 on the over. So give me the under on the Rebs.
The quarterback position is significant. Yeah, I'm with you, Danny. And we don't even know for sure that Jackson Dart is going to be the starting quarterback? It might be Luke.
Bud just said it's going to be Altmaier, right?
Yeah.
Could be. And honestly, I don't think that's an awful thing. I feel like there's a narrative that's whoa, Jackson Dart hasn't been able to win the starting job there. That's bad news. I'm not necessarily sure that's the case. It could just be very good news that Altmaier is playing well.
There's also, I've covered Lane Kiffin a few times, a couple times at FAU. He doesn't exactly run the tightest ship, if you know what I mean. It is loose. And if there were coordinators that were it's not only Matt Corral, the coordinators, which we did mention, I think that's big. There's an adjustment to coaching under a coach that's a little more loosey-goosey that lets play. And he's embraced all of the new era athlete and NIL and tweeting and having fun, which is a good thing. But I'm curious to see if he can replicate it, it doesn't have to replicate last year to get the over. I'm curious to know what happens. They start strong and they lose a couple games, couple back-to-back road games there towards the down, towards the stretch. I think it'd be very interesting at LSU and at Texas A&M. That's where I wonder if they go back-to-back losses, then what happens? Then it's 3 in a row. Could things crumble towards the end of the season? You embrace those players with NIL. Curious to know what happens. We're not going back to a New Year's 6. What type of mindset is the team in?
We're reuniting with Baby Schematic Advantage after 2 years with USF. Charlie Weiss Jr. comes over and gets to get some co-OC job. They were together at FAU, And now he's an SEC coordinator. Big stuff.
I think Danny's point's a really good one. Is there a bigger issue going on there that caused more than half the staff to turn over after a Sugar Bowl year?
I don't know. Well, all right, so
is there collapse potential of a team of mercenaries?
It's not like Ole Miss can't match offers. They would do what they want to keep. They can spend,
especially in the transfer market. Ole Miss is playing for keeps in the transfer market.
So coaches like if
I'm talking about the coach
side,
market,
not really.
They can match all those salaries.
Oh, right.
Sorry.
Because Durkin going to Texas A&M, it's the Texas A&M DC job. Like that was, Elko left Notre Dame to go to that job. Like it is coming with a big salary. It is obviously valued in the marketplace. Lebby is going to Oklahoma like that.
Lebby makes sense. He gets to call his own stuff. You're never going to get out of Lane's shadow or Heupel's shadow if you're Lebby, if you don't go coach for a guy who's a defensive coach.
Yeah. And going to be the offensive coordinator for a defensive coach is a good way to get a head coaching job down the line.
Yeah. If he lets you call your stuff, for sure.
All right. I want to take a moment, quick shout out to Preston Weaver, who earlier in the show, I asked if somebody could do a meme of Mario holding the football. He's already sent it to me. 5 minutes later, there it is on the screen. You dropped this king. That is going to come in very handy on the socials during Texas A&M games this year. I just have a feeling.
Thank you, Preston. You are you're a champ. Coming up on the other side, we continue our breakdown of the SEC West win totals. Arkansas and LSU both at 7, Mississippi State and Auburn, plus hitting on some huge injury news at Wake Forest and Florida. All that and more next.
Count them out.
Let's start with Arkansas. It's priced a little bit more. Arkansas, over-under win total of 7 wins, minus 125 to the over, minus 105 to the under. The non-conference slate, Cincinnati at home, Missouri State at BYU and Liberty. I need to take a moment to celebrate Arkansas, which will be playing host to Bobby Petrino and Hugh Freeze at home. Just magnificent. I mean, you go to an Arkansas party, you can see literally anybody. South Carolina also going to be a home game at Missouri from the East. Then you get into the SEC West. We mentioned that neutral site game against Texas A&M in the Cowboys Stadium. That counts as a road game for the Razorbacks this year. They're also at Mississippi State, at Auburn. Home games in division play, Alabama, LSU, and Ole Miss, all coming to Fayetteville. 7 wins, round number, a team that is right in the middle of this division that, as we've already hinted and discussed, it is very tough to slide the pieces around. What are we doing?
I'm in the over, but I don't love it. I think they're probably 7-5. I think KJ Jefferson's one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the conference. They've built an offense around him. I do think the loss of Treylon Burks is pretty big, but I'm a believer in the culture that Sam Pittman has built. Like I had them losing to Texas A&M earlier, but I do think their schedule, especially the non-con, is pretty easy. The BYU game's a little tricky, but I'm going to go over. But I think 7-5 is probably where they do finish.
Whoever wins the boot, that's I don't know what to do with Arkansas LSU, and they're both at 7, and so whoever wins that, like, what has anybody been close to that trophy? Because it looks like it, based on comparison from photo, that, the state of Louisiana and the state of Arkansas, and it's big. It's got to be about 4 feet tall total. I mean, as I was going through this, and I'm not trying to spoil my LSU pick as well, but I kind of see them. I count them up as being a push, like a perfect 7-5. And if Arkansas can beat LSU, then I think that this can be a good overplay. Like I don't have a strong read on this. I lean to the over only because I think that South Carolina and Missouri is a very manageable draw, even with Missouri being a rivalry game. I think that Arkansas will be favored against Cincinnati. I think at BYU is absolutely tricky, but it's a game that's winnable for the Razorbacks. So it is a strong push. I guess I lean over, but if they lose to LSU, then it's just going to settle at 7-5.
This pains me, but I have to go under. I just don't think this team is going to improve on last year. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I was doing a preview for this for on HQ last week, Danny, and you mentioned Treylon Burks. Burks was roughly 40% of their offensive output last year. And his total on KJ Jefferson's passing yards was an even larger impact because of how many of those yards came after the catch. Like there were a lot of very short throws to Treylon Burks where then he just took off like a freight train running through defenses and picking up a ton of yards afterwards. And I think the offense is still going to be good. I just don't know when you have a focal point and they leave, there's questions for me about how you can replace that so quickly. I think the schedule, while they don't have a ton of road games, is difficult. Non-conference games against Cincinnati, a team that's not going to be as good as last year, but is still a team that could be the best group of 5 team in the country and was in the playoff last year. A road trip to BYU, a Liberty team that's going to give you problems offensively. I think you combine that with your SEC schedule, and there are just too many possible landmines that you could hit. And another thing that I look at too, like for teams like last year, the Razorbacks lost 4 games, but if you look at how they performed in those losses, they came by an average of 15 points each. And just for comparison's sake, in the rest of the SEC, only 3 teams had a worse scoring margin in their losses last year: Mississippi State, Auburn, and LSU. But the thing is, Mississippi State lost 2 more games. Auburn and LSU lost 3 more games. Arkansas, with only 4 losses, had a worse scoring margin. And that to me says maybe you weren't as good as your record suggests. So I think there's going to be, considering what they lost, considering defensively they play a whole hell of a lot of bend but don't break, and they did very well in the red zone last year. Will they be able to maintain the kind of success they had there? I think this is a bowl team, but I think we're going to see a drop off in the record. I've got them going 6-6, so I'm going on the under.
I am mathematically on the under here, but I will note that you should only be playing the over at Caesars. Okay. 7 minus 120 or minus 110 is by far the lowest number in the market that I see on my screen. And I've got about 12 books pulled up. Now, some of them I think are cloned because they look really similar. Whereas other books, like Tom, that meme up there again, they have under 7.5 minus 145 other spots. So if you want the over, bet it with our sponsor. If you want the under, don't give up a free half win for 30 more cents of juice. So betting advisory there. Like I will probably have a lock on this. It's not going to be at the Caesars number. But
the
Caesars
Bowser
number
Sportsbook?
It's off market. Yeah, Bowser Sportsbook, correct. The Caesars number to the over is a little bit off market, and I think is maybe value if you like this team more than I do. I'm worried about the loss of Burks. Tom already hit that really hard.
What about Hazelwood? Does he finally click? That's an old
I'd love him
Barton
to.
Simmons, like, you've loved him. Barton's loved him.
Yeah.
I mean, ever since this guy's been in high school, we've been waiting for Hazelwood to just like explode onto the scene. And I would think that when we look at the Kendall Briles offense, it's like, well, this should be a good opportunity for him to step into that role, get a ton of targets, and finally, end this season looking like an NFL receiver.
I agree with you on that. Like that if they go over, that will be one of the keys. The guy I'm most worried about them losing actually is John Ridgeway. So they play that drop 8 stuff with a 3-man front, and they play it really well. I think Barry Odom's an awesome DC because he just understands the personnel they have and doesn't ask them to do things they cannot do. But there is a personnel element to what they've done. And part of that was having John Ridgeway be a disruptor in the middle, be a true 2-gap guy. And look, they've had to replace a guy like that 2 out of the last 3 years. Maybe they will do so again successfully and have a really good one in the wings. I'm not super confident they have a guy as good as John Ridgeway. That was a hell of a college football player. They also lose a ton of experience in the secondary, guys who knew how to play Barry's defense in the back end. I'm not a huge believer that KJ Jefferson is like an awesome NFL prospect or anything like that, but in that offense, they run that Briles stuff. They're going to score some points. Can they score enough points if the defense, slips a little bit? I had them as like a top 20 defense last year. If they're merely like a top 30 defense, I could see them going 6-6, but I'm not betting under 7. So for me, for show pick purposes, give me the over 7.
Yeah.
So I'm the low man on the Hogs. What the hell's
Oh,
happening?
Danny.
Oh,
We're probably both low.
Where you at, Danny?
Oh, I'm on well, I gave it already,
Danny's
didn't
on
I?
the over.
I'm on
Yeah,
the
Danny's
over.
on the over.
I'm on the over. Yeah. Double checking.
Oh.
I'm like, what did I just give? I'm like,
A name to know for DFS, kid named Rocket Sanders, Raheem Sanders, good 2-way player in high school. Some people liked him as a backer. Some people liked him as a running back. He's going to start a running back for them, I suspect. and that kid can go. That was like a COVID class kid, if I recall. He's got some real juice to him.
Count them up.
The LSU Tigers, year one with Brian Kelly, got a win total of 7, -110 to the over, -120 to the under. Start the season on Sunday of Labor Day weekend against the Florida State Seminoles. The rest of the non-con includes Southern, New Mexico, and then a late season meeting with UAB. Draw from the East. The Florida game is in Gainesville this year, and they welcome Tennessee to Baton Rouge. At Auburn, at Arkansas, at Texas A&M are the road games in division play. Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Alabama all coming to Tiger Stadium. 7 wins, just like Arkansas. What's the pick?
I truly have no damn idea.
Right?
I'm going under for the purposes of the show and for my numbers, but I don't know that I could really trust my numbers because I have absolutely no idea what happened last year that was real, what happened last year that wasn't, what's going to be different this year with a whole new coaching staff, like a carousel of quarterbacks. Will they all play? Will only one play? Who's going to play? I don't know what the hell LSU is going to look like in 2022. So I'm going with an under simply because I feel like this is kind of a redshirt year for Brian Kelly, and I don't know if the fans are going to want to give him that same benefit of the doubt, but I just feel like there's going to be a lot of overhauling going into this program. And while, Bud, you talked about it when we were talking about Alabama, they probably have the best receiver core in the conference outside of Alabama, but I don't know if that's going to be enough because I don't really trust the quarterback situation. And I think defensively, they're still going to be pretty good. But offensively, I don't have a whole lot of trust in this team. So it's hard for me to look at that schedule and see who they have to play and say, okay, yeah, no, they're definitely winning that game. There are way too many coin flips and not enough that's a certain win kind of game for me. So I have to go under. But again, no damn idea.
Danny?
I'm with Tom in the no idea. Where I'm off of Tom is I'm on the over. This team is always talented. They had 9 dudes drafted last year, second behind Georgia. Like, Brian Kelly is going to inherit a roster that he's going to be sound. I think Brian Kelly is a heck of a coach. I think the resume is perfect. Questions at quarterback concern me. But in a lot of these toss-up games, I think this team's going to be more disciplined. I think they're going to be better coached across the board, coached. I got them going over. Not by a lot. Like, I don't love it. But I think 8-4 is probably where they'll
more
land.
likely than 6-6. I mean, that's where you're sitting on the – yeah. And like I said, if LSU wins the boot, I feel good about 8-4. If they lose the boot, they probably end up 7-5. But I mean, I'm not talking to our resident Knowles here. The point spread is close. Do you think that like how did y'all rate that one? Because I've got that as a win for LSU, and I've got the Tennessee game as a win for LSU. So now I've gotten 5, and I'm only going to get 1 more the rest of the way. I don't see that being the case. So I'm leaning over here and understanding that 7-5 is one of the likely outcomes.
I can tell you right now that Sunday night game between LSU and Florida State and New Orleans is going to be the game that I overreact to the most. No matter what the result is, I'm going to take it way too seriously.
Well, because like Florida State's offensive line is not going to have to face. Florida State does not have Pitt this year, correct?
No, but they have Miami.
They have Miami and Clemson. Yeah, I think it's going to be trouble for Jordan Travis.
I bet this pretty hard when it came out at over 6. I just texted out the ticket to the group chat there. 7's a tougher number for me. This is really sort of push range. I don't have a super strong feeling on this. I think LSU does have, you could argue they have the best receiving core in the SEC. Defensive line wise, I think they have just total studs there up front who, could all be like top 100 NFL pick type guys if they click. But like the secondary, that's a lot of transfers to be counting on. Joe Fucha, Converse, like guys who have played ball in the SEC, but it's still a lot of transfers to be counting on. Offensive line scares me a lot for them. They are starting a true freshman left tackle named Will Campbell, who had an excellent spring for them, but also a kid that it's hard for me to shake. Like Walter Nolan beat him badly at the Future 50 event last July that I was at. Walter Nolan, like speed and power off the edge. Nolan's like this 340-pound kid who signed with A&M, like number one overall player in the country, arguably. That's a lot to be handling in an opening game. FSU has some defensive linemen who are going to be playing in the NFL that he's going to have to block in that opener. And he'll probably place a couple more NFL guys in the SEC, I would have to imagine. So I think this is a good number. This team's a major wild card. I think it could be Brennan being the quarterback, but I don't know yet, man.
You have no idea. Like Brian Kelly is the modern day Steve Spurrier when it comes to the quarterbacks. Like if he's got more than one option, he's probably going to use them all at some point. He's going to drive you insane as for when he's using them and when he's not. But this is a team like I could see LSU finishing second in the West. I could see LSU finishing last place in the West. I just don't know what the hell's going to happen.
Yeah, Brian Kelly just last season. This isn't even like we don't even have to go back to Pike and
Caleros.
Yeah, we don't even have to go back to like Pike and Caleros. We don't even have to go back to Tommy Reese.
That's
like,
a deep cut.
Like we don't even have to go back all the way. We only need to go back to last season when he would do Jack Cohn for a little bit, then we get Tyler Buckner for a little bit, and just continue just move these guys in and out. Like Miles Brennan will be the starter, then Jane Daniels will come in after a couple series, then Miles Brennan will be back in the game. I'm 100% anticipating that as well, which might. Hey, maybe it works. Maybe it's going to frustrate the hell out of LSU fans.
I mean, he's gone from Grand Valley State to Cincinnati to Notre Dame and LSU, so while it frustrates the hell out of me, it's clearly worked for him.
Clearly. How many games are going to win this fall? Mississippi State Bulldogs over under win total of 6.5 wins, -120 to the over, -110 to the under. The non-conference is Memphis at Arizona, Bowling Green, and East Tennessee State. Draw from the East includes going to Kentucky and hosting Georgia. Woo! West Division draw at LSU, at Alabama, at Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Auburn, all coming to town. Will Rogers was one of the most prolific quarterbacks in the SEC in the country last season. And Mississippi State under Mike Leach has created this, I would argue, a kind of high floor and spunky sort of dangerous proposition where I don't think any team on this schedule is going to look at Mississippi State as a certain win. We discussed for Georgia that when we did the same exercise for Georgia that we did for Alabama, where we think they're going to go 12-0. But if you're going to circle a game, what looks dangerous, then yeah, that game in Starkville in November is going to be one of them. So it's a team that you feel like could pop up and get almost anybody on the schedule, but yet with a over-under win total of 6.5, clearly we are not looking at a team that is going to be competing for an SEC West title. So how many of those games break Mississippi State's way? What are we doing at 6.5?
I'm going over. I think Klang is going to catch some people by surprise this year. I look at their schedule. I see 2 losses for sure. Definitely. I don't mean just 2 losses overall, but they're going to lose at Alabama and then they're going to lose at home to Georgia. I don't see them beating either of them. But there isn't another game on the schedule where I look at and say Mississippi State can't win that game. Like they get Texas A&M at home this year. They beat Texas A&M in College Station last season. They get Auburn at home. They get Arkansas at home. They get, LSU's on the road, but we just talked about LSU. No idea what the hell to expect there. That's not a game that you can just write Mississippi State off and say they're losing that game. Non-con Memphis, they're probably going to win that against the greatest one-win team in the country last year at Arizona. Probably going to win that. Bowling Green, you're going to win that. And then, ETSU late in the season, you're going to win that. So there's probably 4 wins right there. So the question is, can they go 3-5 in the SEC? Yeah. And we've seen too, like if you look at Mike Leach's history as a coach, year 3 is typically when things start going well. Like he'll get off to some slow starts, but by year 3, things are in place. His roster is in place. His offense is in place. Everybody knows everything that they're going to be doing. And the difference is this time he actually has a good defense. He's never really had that in year 3 before. So I think Mississippi State could surprise some people. I think they're going to go 7-5. I think they could go 8-4.
Hey, Bud, have you gone inside the guts of the power ratings for Mississippi State? And I guess the first question should have been, why is Mississippi State getting some love from the power ratings? Because they grade out as a team that is arguably even within a point or two on a neutral field with Texas A&M, yet clearly are sitting with a very different win total and expectations in terms of the opinion and the layman out there looking at the SEC West.
Sure. So, on that chip, so they were like a top 40-ish team last year, power ratings wise. If you take out the Bulls, they were a little bit better than that. And I do. I know some people want to leave them in. It's up for debate. The reason why you think they make a jump to top 20 this year, but their win total is still so low, is that they do have the two teams on the schedule that are considered the auto losses in the league in Georgia and Alabama. And they don't, sorry, Barton, have the one team that is considered an auto win for everybody who's not named Missouri in Vandy, right? And they also don't draw Missouri from the East. So that's why their win total is so, depressed. They also, like, non-conference wise, at Arizona it's close to a lock, but it's not like totally out of the realm of the possibility that Mike Leach's team could lose a non-conference game out on the West Coast or something like that. But yeah, that's why. It certainly
wouldn't be the first time a Mike Leach team lost to a Pac-12 team it wasn't supposed to.
Correct. Didn't they get clipped by an FCS team one year up there too?
Yes,
early on.
Eastern got them. I'm pretty sure it was.
I'm still going over on this. It's like a small play. Like I would actually bet it. I do think if you're doing the returning production formula stuff, you need to like double adjust for the loss of Charles Cross. That's something that's not just going to be captured in how many snaps you lost on the offensive line. Like that guy's a first round pick at offensive tackle. But everybody else on this roster, with the exception of Cross, Mekhi Polk, and pretty much it. Like they lost Emerson and Peters in the back end. They get almost everybody else back. And it's a very veteran team. They can run more stuff with their DC, who I was going to give a lot of praise to, but now I can't remember his name. That's
Zach Arnett.
Zach Arnett. Thank you. I think they can go 7-5.
Over?
Yeah.
What are you guys doing with the Auburn game?
Win. Home game. And it's Auburn.
It's off a bye, and it's in Starkville.
Yeah,
I'm giving it to him.
It's in November.
I'm in such a toss-up in this one. I'll lean towards the quarterback. I think he's the second best quarterback in the league. So I'll go over. I think also about the third year, seeing the improvement in Mike Leach's, kind of where things turn a corner and things start to ramp up a little bit. I'll rely on that history too.
Count them up. And the Auburn Tigers over under win total at the Caesars Sportsbook of around 6 wins, -130 to the over, +100 to the under. Non-conference play, boy, they just start posted up on the plains. Mercer, San Jose State, Penn State, all at home. Also, then later in the year, they will be playing Western Kentucky, also at home. Draw from the East includes Missouri, then at Georgia for their rivalry game. Then in the West, at Ole Miss, at Mississippi State, at Alabama for the Iron Bowl, LSU, Arkansas, Texas A&M, all at home. Brian Harsin caught a lot of heat at the end of last season. Well documented, much discussed here on the Cover 3 podcast. Tank Bigsby, we're going to do the, who is the best quarterback in the SEC? Who are the best wide receivers in the SEC? Tank Bigsby, right there in the argument, if not starting the conversation for best running back in the Southeastern Conference. Then we've got Zach Calzada through the transfer portal. TJ Finley remains a part of this team. What do we do? We got changeover at coordinators, coaching staff in general. We've made all these references to where's Auburn, where is Auburn at the end of the season? Where is Auburn at the end of the season for the win total? What do we do with 6 wins?
Under.
It's a much tougher number than. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Danny.
I'll say under. I just don't know how you can trust the team. I think 6-6 is probably the number, but how do you trust the team when who knows how many players want a new coach? But we know that a very definitive faction of Auburn faithful want a new coach. I just think it's a toxic environment that Brian Harsin is trying to go against the grain in. Well, I mean, I look at the Georgia being just a blowout loss. I think they could lose at Ole Miss, and then good luck trying to finish the season when there's going to be an uproar of what should happen at head coach I think there's question marks whether they beat Penn State at home. There's no way I can trust this team with an over.
4-0 is possible.
Possible.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
5-0, maybe even possible. But what if Western Kentucky finishes Brian Harsin and they go 0 for 4 in the month of November? No, I'm predicting a big step back for Western Kentucky. This is obviously not the same. No Bailey Zappi, no Zach Kittle. That's not the case. But I still think that when the schedule gets tough and it starts at Georgia, at Georgia, loss. At Ole Miss, loss. Arkansas could come to town, loss. At Mississippi State, I already mentioned in the Mississippi State breakdown, I'm handing that to the Bulldogs, loss. Texas A&M, loss. We could start with great vibes. And I just think that at the back
they
half
did last year too.
Yeah, and that's what's going to make it hurt even worse is the way that they just slid backwards throughout the whole second half of the season. If it starts to happen, here we go again. Yeah, I'm on the under, but it's not a strong they are going to miss a bowl prediction as much as it is I don't see 7 wins. So it's the way that I've got it in my notes is push lean under, but I would not be out here taking the over.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on it. I bet this 6.5 when it came out. There are 6.5s on the market right now, but you have to lay juice to go over. And I just think that missing a bowl is more likely here than winning 7 games. First, the strengths. I think this will be the best starting Auburn offensive line in maybe 6 or 7 years. I think they finally have some guys up there up front they like. If they stay healthy. If they don't, I think the depth is a very legitimate concern. I think their pass rush is probably okay. I do not think that their interior defensive line is anything to write home about, to be honest. I think they could get pushed around a little bit there. They lost some very key pieces in the secondary, like Roger McCreary and Smoke Monday. Hope Smoke gets healthy, by the way. I saw he got hurt in, I think it was Saints camp the other day. So shout out him. The most concerning part about this team for me is the receiver position. This was a bad group last year, and they lost Kobe Hudson and Robertson. I don't think. Is this the worst passing game in the SEC West by far or by a little? Because I'm pretty sure it's worse. I'm just not sure by how much.
In the West, yes.
Is it worse than everybody but Vanderbilt in the East throwing the ball?
No, I think it's better than Mizzou.
Interesting. So I almost think I trust the alpha nerd to have a better passing game than I do this group. I worry this team is too plotting and has too many games that it cannot hit explosive plays with the pass game, and may not have quite enough defense to back it up. So that to play that kind of plotting, run the ball 40 times a game style. So I'm going to go under. But I'd rather pay up to get the 6.5 and win on 7.
Auburn will be a lock for me when we do the locks pod next week, and it will be a lock on the over.
Ooh. All right.
You are all slaves to the narrative. You're just paying attention to all the off-field stuff. You're not paying nearly enough attention to the on-field stuff. I think, as I said when they made the hire, I think Brian Harsin is a very good football coach. When I watched his teams at Boise State, I thought they were good football teams. I think now that he has survived whatever the hell that stupidity was last year, Auburn has a very good football coach going into the season. I think at quarterback, they have made an upgrade. I know Zach Calzada is not great, but this makes sense to me when I say it. Maybe it'll make sense to you. Zach Calzada is a Brian Harsin quarterback. Zach Calzada could have played for Boise State, and it would have made a whole ton of sense. I think he fits what Harsin wants to do on offense. I think that's going to work. Going back to the worst passing game in the conference, talked about Vandy. I think he's better than Missouri. I also think, due to some news we'll probably be talking about in a little bit, Florida might be better than Florida, too. I don't think the passing offense is that bad, Bud. You touched on it. I think this offensive line is good. I think the defensive line is good. I feel like when you have good offensive line and defensive line, that goes a long way. And when I look at this schedule, Chip, you mentioned it. This team could be 4-0 to start. It could be 5-0 because, again, no damn idea what LSU is. At Georgia, no, not happening. At Ole Miss, could happen. bye. Arkansas at home off a bye. That's a winnable game. Mississippi State on the road. I just said I'd like the Bulldogs. I give the Bulldogs that one, but Auburn can win that. A&M at home. Strong lean to A&M, but not unimpeachable for Auburn. Western Kentucky, that's going to be a win. And then, the final game of the year at Alabama, come on, that's going to be Alabama. But it is also the Iron Bowl, and crazy crap happens in the Iron Bowl, even without Gus Malzahn. So I think this team is going to get to 7-5. I think this team can get to 8-4. I am very much on the over here. Go Tigers, war damn Eagle.
Can I ask you a question about this?
You can ask me anything you want, bud.
What? So you said you think he fits what Hartman wants to do on offense. Like, what do you think that actually is, though? Because I'm curious.
It's not all that different. It's less complicated, but it's not all that different from what we see Jimbo have his quarterbacks do. Just he's not asking you to make huge throws. He's just asking you to make simple, accurate throws for the most part. And I think that's kind of what Calzada was in last year. But now he doesn't have 1,000 checks and all this other crap that he's got to worry about. It's just going to be go to the line of scrimmage, make this read, make the throw. Like he only averaged just under 7 yards per attempt last year, but 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions as a sophomore, doesn't make the worst decisions, didn't have great receiving options last year. I don't think he's going to have great receiving options this year either, but I do think that they're going to rely on their run game more. Like Auburn is going to play not Big Ten West stylish, but they're going to be kind of in that vein where it's physical, complementary football. They're not going to try to outscore you. They're just going to try to play smart and beat you and keep it close.
Play action, 1-2, get out. Yeah.
Yes, all that kind of stuff. And I think Calzada could be a very good fit for that. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the year we're looking at Zach Calzada and saying that's one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC.
Wow. And then Brian Harsin gets a $95 million extension. That's all I hear the next.
And then they fire him 6 months later.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I don't like seeing coaches I think he's been in such a tough situation. I hope you're right. I just wouldn't bet on it.
I love that he brought in Brian Harsin is so against the grain that we don't get to see all the familiar name. Like all the SEC coaches, just, it's all inbreeding when it comes to their coaching staff. You look at the Auburn coaching staff. Who? What's that guy? Okay, I got to click on more bios.
They tried the inbreeding route, and that didn't work out.
Yeah, that clearly didn't work out. Bill, Jerry Hennon loves your prediction, Tom. That's absolutely fantastic. Any more thoughts on Auburn before we take this to Sam Hartman? So news breaking out of Winston-Salem on Wednesday. Sam Hartman is out for an indefinite amount of time due to a non-football medical issue. Dave Clawson said that Sam Hartman underwent a procedure yesterday. There's no clear time frame for his return, but he will return this season. That means that Mitch Griffiths is the number one quarterback right now for the season opener against VMI, but Michael Kern will compete with him through the rest of fall camp for those QB1 duties. This is an offense that Sam Hartman has absolutely mastered. It is very unique, and it has explosive wide receivers on the outside, including A.T. Perry, who's one of the top wide receivers in the country, and Donovan Green, who we've seen in flashes back from injury last season. If he's back by the time Wake's schedule really gets tough, maybe this isn't a major issue, but this is clearly a major setback for the Demon Deacons. Thoughts on this news and how it might have adjusted your predictions for Wake Forest and what they can accomplish this year?
Yeah, like now that we know that he has a chance to come back this year, it makes me feel like a little bit better, that we're sort of assuming this is not like a life-threatening thing at this point. Like early this morning when I read that announcement, I was like,
uh-oh.
I think we all thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, serious, like long-term medical issue or something. I mean, they're talking about quarterback competition stuff, so he's going to miss at least some part of the season. If he makes it to the back end of the season, I think they still have an excellent shot to make a bowl game pretty comfortably, right? Like they should beat VMI. They will still be double-digit favorites on the road at Vanderbilt without Sam Hartman. I mean, like I think I had him at 15.8. So you're not going to cut that down 6 points because of Hartman, I don't think. Liberty, Clemson, Florida State, Army. that's sort of 3 out of 4 games there. Clemson almost always just crushes those guys, regardless who plays quarterback. Those are kind of 3 really important games. If he can get back for some of those, that would really help. Their back half, though, is very easy the last 2. I mean, Syracuse at home and at Duke are probably the 2 easiest conference games they have. That BC, Louisville, NC State, North Carolina stretch
that's where you need them. October 15th is their bye, and that stretch that you just mentioned starts October 22nd after the bye. If you were to look at like where, if the medical team and his recovery and getting ready, that seems like where all of those timetables would line up. And again, the indefinite, the expectations that he will be able to return this season. He was at practice and seemed to be in good spirits. He had a quote officially released from Wake discussing how it was a very disappointing day yesterday to get this news from the doctors undergoing this procedure and knowing that he would miss the start of the year. But the tone from the first release, as Bud mentioned, to what we've gotten with comments from Dave Clawson and more information from Winston-Salem indicate that hopefully, with no setbacks or no further issues, that we will be seeing Sam Hartman, who was the runner-up, I believe, for the ACC preseason player of the year voting. So clearly, one of the biggest stars in the conference. If he, like you said, Bud, I think if he can get back for October 22nd and remain healthy for the rest of the season, then Wake Forest 100%, not 100%. Wake Forest is still going bowling. If you had an 8.5 over, yikes. I think
might have been my suggestion. And that's where I'm like, all right, not anymore. Like, well, you'd be crazy to take that now.
It dropped to 7 at the places that actually did. Like most books took it down, a couple adjusted.
Right. I mean, in a quarterback,
by the way, if you are
system,
if you're betting with a local, like not like a national major book, if you do have like a bookie, that's a great way to get banned by that guy. Like fire on a under win total, like right as injury news happens. Like they don't take real kindly to that. Just yeah,
it's a great way to boost your sports line record. No, we've got policies. We've got policies that they would not like you to do that. But the other news from college football on the injury front, and it's been referenced a couple times in this episode, Florida losing wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. He is out indefinitely with a foot injury. This definitely calms my Anthony Richardson could be awesome bold take from Monday. As we look at the rest of that wide receiver room, the names are familiar because we've been expecting each of them individually. Justin Shorter, I think, probably is the most recognizable, but even Xavier Henderson, Whittemore, like there are pass catchers here that we've been looking at to really have an impact. Pearsall being out, major downgrade for Florida. How does that change the expectation, or does it change any of your picks from Monday's episode?
It makes me a little more scared of taking the over on the Gators, but I mean, it's a big injury in that, like, when you look at Florida's receiving core, there's not exactly a top option guy that's like standout stud. So losing him, who reportedly was doing pretty well in camp, is not going to be good. But it's just Florida's offense is not really going to be built on the passing game anyway. Like you said that, Anthony Richardson, it hurts your idea that he's going to have a fantastic season. I think Anthony Richardson could still have a fantastic season. It'll just be more like the Khalil Tate at Arizona kind of fantastic seasons, where maybe he's not throwing for 3,000 yards, but he might rush for 2,000. So it's not good, but I don't think it's like a devastating injury.
Yeah. It concerns me that he was getting that much hype in the early part of their camp. I think it probably, like, probably validates my opinion here. So, like, preconceived bias that their receivers are not very good, that this transfer they took from Arizona State, who had, what do you have, like
400
yards
580 yards last year, 12 reception. So he was a Florida receiver.
Right. Like, for that guy to come in there and be the one who was getting all the hype, that tells me something. I think it's very small sample set, a week of camp, about the rest of their receiver room. This takes it from it would be really nice if Justin Shorter could play to his physical potential to we really need Justin Shorter to play to his physical potential now. And the sample set's pretty big on him not consistently catching the ball. So we'll see. If he catches it, that'd be great.
Keep your eyes, obviously, to 24/7 Sports for all the latest updates from Wake Forest and Florida and more. You can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fernelli. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. We have definitely on the podcast side something special coming for you on Thursday. A very special guest. We're excited for you to check that out. We will be back answering some of your mailbag questions as well. So make sure that you get it in there. 5-star review. Put your question in the review. We will tackle it in a future mailbag episode. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.